We continue now at the top of Daf Chaf Aleph in Meseches Kiddushin. This is Kiddushin Daf 20a. The Gemara continues with Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. We learn out from the word la'ama that if the father is selling his daughter as an amma ha'ivriya, we learn out that he can even sell her lekrovim. He can even sell her to relatives. Rashi says lekrovim afal gav she'en kan yud. What that means to say is, even though there's no possibility of yud by relatives, she'en kiddushin tovsin, but kiddushin is not even chal when you try to do kiddushin with a relative. This is unlike psulim. By the psulim case we discussed on the previous summit, so over there at least kiddushin can be chal. It might be a prohibited kiddushin, but the kiddushin can be chal. Rabbi Eliezer is saying even lekrovim it's going to be allowed to sell her, even though the kiddushin is not chal. V'halodinu, now you might say it's logical. What do we need a pasuk for? Imochra lepsulin lo yimchren lekrovim. If you can sell her to psulin, and shouldn't he for sure be able to sell her to relatives? But that's not true. It's not a good kal v'chomer. Mala mochra lepsulin shimrotza liyayid miyayid. At least when he sells her to psulin. So if the person wants to do yid, there's a possibility. As we said, the kiddushin is chal. Yimcharena lekrovim shimrotza liyayid. Eno miyayid. He should be able to sell her to relatives where there's not even a possibility of yid. Amar kro la'ama malamid shemochra lekrovim. That's why the pasuk says la'ama. That pasuk teaches us that he's allowed to sell her even to krovim. And the Gemara continues with Rabbi Meir now, according to the sheet of Rabbi Meir, and Rashi says, Rabbi Meir did dorish l'hai la'ama beposek al manas shelo liyayid. Rabbi Meir, again, on the previous summit, he said the word la'ama teaches us that a person is allowed to sell his daughter as an amma ha'ivri, and he can make a stipulation that there cannot be any yud. That's what he learned from the word la'ama. So where does he learn l'psulin? Where does he learn l'krovim? L'psulin nafkalei mehecha de nafkalei l'Rabbi Eliezer. In terms of psulin, he learns it from the same source that Rabbi Eliezer learns it from. That's the pasuk of Imra be'enei Adoneha that we quoted on the previous summit. And bekrovim, when it comes to relatives, in order to sell her as an amma ha'ivriya to relatives, savar lo k'rabbanan. Rabbi Meir actually holds like the rabbanan, the amri ein mocher lekrovim. They say that you're not allowed to sell her to relatives, and therefore you don't need a source for it. It's not even allowed. And the Gemara continues, Tani Chada, we learned in one brayso, mocher la'aviv, the father's allowed to sell his daughter to his own father. The ein mocher levno, but he's not allowed to sell his daughter to his son. Betanya idach, we learned in another brayso, ein mocher lo li'aviv v'lo levno, he can't sell her to his father or to his son. And the Gemara says, Bishlama eino mocher lo la'aviv v'lo levno. I understand the brayso which says he can't sell her to his father or to his son. K'rabbanan, that follows the rabban. You're not allowed to sell her to krovim. You can't sell her to relatives. Ella mochra la'aviv vein mochra levno, but the brayso which says he can sell her to his father, but he can't sell her to his son. Keman, so who does that follow? Lo k'rabbanan v'lo k'Rabbi Eliezer doesn't seem to follow the rabbanan or Rabbi Eliezer, because either you're allowed to sell her to relatives or you're not. Why should we make a distinction between the father and the son? And the Gemara says, Liolam k'rabbanan, really it's following the rabbanan. Again, the rabbanan are the ones who say that you're not allowed to sell her to relatives. However, modu rabbanan hechod di'ikot tzad yud. The rabbanan would admit, in a situation where there is some possibility of yud, meaning to say where he sells to his own father, there actually is a possibility of yud. Rashi explains, ein mochra la'aviv, he can't sell to his father, sha'asura lo mishum bas beno, that would be a problem. She can't marry his father because that's the daughter of his son. That's one of the arayas. V'lo levno, you can't sell her to his son, the havalei achoso, that's his sister. Ve'in kiddushin tovsim b'chayve krisas kedel kamon, there's no kiddushin by chayve krisas, as we'll say later on. And so then the Gemara said, no, there is a distinction. It is possible. The Brisa says that it's possible to sell to his father because there is a possibility of yid. Why? When he sells her to his father, so the father has another son, which essentially is her uncle. You could do yid with her. She could do yid with her uncle, because she's essentially the daughter of his brother. Avol kishemocher levino, but when he sells her to his son, ein kan sad yid, there's not even a possibility of yid, not with his son, obviously, that's brother and sister, and not with the son of his son, lo velo levno, can't be to him or his son, to havalei achos aviv, that would be a problem of the sister of his father. If she would do yid with her master's, which is her brother's son, she actually is the sister of that individual's father, and that's a problem of achos aviv, so there's not even a possibility of yid, and that's why beno is a problem. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, in begapo yavo begapo yetzei. If he enters begapo, then he leaves begapo. And the Brayso says in Machlokas what exactly that means. Begufo nichnas begufo yetzei. According to the Tanakam, it means if he enters with his body, he'll exit with his body. We'll explain that in a moment. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says yechidi nichnas. If he enters alone, yechidi yetzei, then he leaves alone. That also will be explained. And the Gemara says, "My begufo nichnas begufo yetze." What does it mean that he enters with his body and he exits with his body? Amar Rava says, Lomar, it means to say, she'eno yotze barasha yevarim ke'eved, that he's not like an Eved Kanani. An Eved Kanani, if he loses a limb, so he goes free. But when it comes to the Eved Ivri, he doesn't leave barasha yevarim. If he loses a limb, he doesn't go free like an Eved Kanani. That's what it means. Begufo nichnas, he enters with his body, and begufo yetze, he exits with his body. And the Gemara continues, Amarle Abaya, Abaya says to him, Abaya responds to Rava, Hahu milo seitze ketzeiso avodim nafke. Isn't that learned from a different pasuk? The pasuk says she shouldn't go out the same way that the avodim go out. That pasuk says the exact same idea, that she doesn't go out when she loses a limb. That's talking about an Amo Ivriya, the same as an Eved Ivri. And the Gemara says, no, you may hasam, if you only had that pasuk over there, hava mina nesiv lei, demei eine vine. But I would think that you have to pay for the value of the eye that was lost and the Eved Ivri goes free. In other words, lo seitze ketzeiso avodim means the Eved Kanani loses the limb, the Eved Kanani goes free but doesn't get any payment. And maybe by the Eved Ivri actually goes free and receives a payment. That might be what I thought. Kamash malon. So that's what this pasuk is teaching in begapo yavo begapo yetzei. Is teaching that is not the case when it comes to the Eved Ivri. The Eved Ivri does not go free when he loses a limb. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, in the Bryce above, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, Yechidi nichnas yechidi yetze, he enters alone, he exits alone. Ma yechidi yetze, what does that mean that he exits alone? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Hachikamar, this is what it means to say, Yesh lo isho bonim rabu moser lo shivcha kananis. If he has a wife and children, when he enters as an Eved Ivri, then his master can also give him a shivcha kananis, to have children, to have avodim for the master. Ein lo isho bonim, but if he doesn't have a wife and children when he enters the avdus, ein rabu moser lo shivcha kananis, then his master is not able to give him a shivcha kananis. That's what it means. If he enters alone, then he exits alone. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, Nimkar b'moneh v'hishbiach v'yomer al Mosayim. Let's say he sold and he was just sold for a moneh, but then his value increases and now he's worth 200. He's not just worth 100. Minayin shein mechashvin lo el moneh. From where do we know that when we're calculating the amount that it's going to take to redeem him, we go by a moneh. We don't say that he's worth more, and so therefore you need to pay more for the redemption. How do we know that we're lenient in terms of the redemption for the Eved? Shenamar, like the pasuk says, mi kesef miknos. It says from the kesef of his purchase, meaning you go by the original price. The fact that he went up in value, still his redemption is going to be cheaper. Nimkar b'masayim v'hichsev yomer al moneh. Let's say the other way around. Let's say he sold for 200, and then the value goes down, and he's only 100. Minayin shein mechashvin lo el moneh. There also, from where do we know that we calculate by a moneh? We always go by the lower amount. Talmud lomar kafi shanav. So the pasuk says according to the amount of years, meaning you have to calculate the value in the coming years, what's going to be lost to the adon, and therefore you can go by the lower amount. Essentially, we're always darshaning the psukim lekula and saying that the redemption is the lower amount. Now, these psukim that we just quoted above, that's talking about an Eved Ivri that's sold to a non-Jew. So I only know that this is true, that we're lenient by an Eved that's sold to an Oved Kochavim, to a non-Jew. Hoel v'nigal bekrovim, since there the redemption can even take place through relatives. Yodo ala tachtona, so therefore we say that he has the lower hand, meaning to say the master has the lower hand, and the redemption is always going to be cheaper. Nimkar li Yisrael minol, and from where do we know that this is also true if he sold to a Yisrael? Talmud lomar sachir l'gzeir shava. The pasuk says sachir. It says sachir when he's sold to a non-Jew, sachir when he's sold to a Jew. We make a gzeir shava, we compare the two. It's always going to be the cheaper amount. And the Gemara continues, Amar Abaya says, Hareini ke ben Azai b'shukei Tiveria. I am like Ben Azai in the marketplaces of Tiveria. Ben Azai was able to answer any question. I too can answer any question. Amar le'ahu me Rabbanan li Abaya. So one of the Rabbanan said to Abaya, Michti, let us see. Hani kroi ikal midrashinu lekula v'ikal midrashinu lechumra. These psukim that you just quoted above, you could darshan it in a lenient fashion, you can go in a strict fashion. It's not clear that you should always take the cheaper value. It could be darshan the opposite, that you should always take the more expensive. My chaz is the darshinu lekula. Why do we see fit that we darshan it lekula? Midrashinu lechumra, let's darshan it lechumra, let's make it strict. And the Gemara says, he responded, Lo salka daitach, you shouldn't think that. Mido'akel rachmona legabe, because in general, when it comes to an Eved Ivri, the Torah deals leniently with an Eved Ivri, so therefore by the redemption also, we will deal leniently with the Eved Ivri. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brayse, ki tov lo imach, he has to be good with you. Imcha b'maychol v'imcha b'mishta, he has to be with you with your food, with you with your drink. And what does that mean? That you shouldn't be eating bread that's fine bread and he's eating inferior kind of bread. That you should be drinking the old wine, the good wine, and he drinks the new wine, the poor wine. And you're sleeping on soft linen, and he's sleeping on top of straw. It shouldn't be like that. And from here they say, anybody who acquires an Eved Ivri, Kikona Odon Liatzmo, it's like acquiring a master for himself, because you have to treat him so well. And so therefore, just like we treat him well in that regard, when it comes to the redemption also, we're lenient with the Eved Ivri. But the Gemara says, maybe we should say that's only true by eating and drinking. We don't want it to be painful for him. Maybe we should, when it comes to redemption, we should be strict with him. And why should we be strict with him? From the teaching of Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, the Tanya, as we learned in a Brayso, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina Omer. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina says, Bo rei kama kosha avoka shel shvius. Come and see how bad it is, even if you have a hint of an aveira in regards to the Shemitah year, in regards to Shvius. Adam nosev and nosin bepeiros Shvius. If a person does business with the fruits of the Shemitah year, of the 7th year, lesof mochras metaltalov. In the end, he's going to have to sell his movable property. The point of this drush over here is we're asking why various psukim are all next to each other, and the idea is that one sin causes a punishment to happen, which causes something else to happen if he continues not to do teshuvah. So the first thing that's going to happen to him is he'll sell his movable property. Shenemar, like the pasuk says, b'shnas hayovel tashuvi shalachuzaso. It talks about yovel Shemitah year. V'chisimkaru mimkar lamisecha okanu miyad amisecha. Then the next thing it talks about selling things to one another. Davar hanikna miyad liyad, meaning movable objects that pass from one hand to the other. And then lo hirgish, let's say he still doesn't feel his aveira, he doesn't do teshuvah. Lesof mocher sadosav, then he's going to have to sell his fields. It's a worse punishment. Shenemar, like it says, ki yomuch achichu mocher me'achuzaso. He gets poor, your brother becomes poor, and he sells from his inheritance. Lo basal liyado at shamocher beso, and then teshuvah still doesn't come to his hand. He's going to have to sell his house. Shenemar, like it says, ki yimchor beis moshav yerchoma, talks about the selling of one's house. And the Gemara comments, Ma'ishna Hasam Damar Lo Hirgish. What's the difference over there by that first Aveira? The language we use for not doing Teshuvah is Lo Hirgish. He doesn't feel the need to do Teshuvah. Or Ma'ishna Hachan, what's the difference over here when we get to the next Aveira, the Amar Lo Basal Yada, which talks about the fact that the Teshuvah doesn't come to his hand. And that the Gemara explains, Kidder Rav Huna, that follows Rav Huna. The Amar Rav Huna, because Rav Huna said, Kevan Sha'avar Adam Aveira V'shana, but when a person does an Aveira and repeats it, Hutralo, it becomes mutter to him. The Gemara says, Hutralo Sal Kadayatach, do you think it literally becomes mutter to him? Of course not. It's not going to be mutter. Elanasis Lo Kater, what it means is it's as if it's mutter. When a person does an Aveira once, so the next time it's much easier to do the Aveira, and that's why it changes the language, because the first time the idea is Hirgish. It was difficult to do the Aveira, so that he feels the need to do Teshuvah, so it's saying Lo Hirgish. If he doesn't feel that need, then the next punishment, and then when in the next time it comments on not doing Teshuvah, it uses a different language of Lo Basal Yadu, because at that point in time already, so then we say it's Nasis Lo Keheter, and therefore he doesn't even feel the Aveira anymore, so we say that Teshuvah didn't come to him. And then the Gemara continues, Lo basal liyado at shemocher's bito, but still the teshuvah doesn't come to his hand. He still doesn't do teshuvah, so then he's going to sell his daughter. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, v'chiyim korishas bito liyama, when a man sells his daughter as a maidservant. Now the problem is this one pasuk of v'chiyim korishas bito liyama is not in the context of all the other psukim. It's in a completely different location in the Chumash, and that's what the Gemara points out. V'afagav debito lo ksiva b'hainyon, even though selling his daughter is not even written in this parsha over here. Hakamash malon nizvinish. What we're teaching is that a person would prefer to sell his daughter as an Amo Ivriya rather than borrowing Baribis. As we'll see in a moment, the next thing that's mentioned in the Psukim over there is that he's going to have to borrow with interest. But there's something that the person would actually prefer to do before he borrows with interest, and that's he would prefer to sell his daughter as a slave. My time, and what's the reason a person prefers to sell his daughter as a slave rather than borrow with ribis? Because barate migra v'nafka, because by the daughter you can just deduct the amount. Again, whatever labor is still owed can be deducted, and in theory she can go free. You can redeem her. V'ham mosva v'azla, but when it comes to interest, it just keeps increasing. It keeps adding on. So people try to avoid ribis. And then again, we'll continue. Lo basal yadu, the teshuvah still doesn't come to him. At shalava bribis, then he's going to have to borrow with interest, as we just said. Shenemar, as the pasuk says over there, v'chiyamuch achichu matu yadu imach v'samechlei al tikach meito v'gomer. Pasuk talks about a person becomes poor and talks about lending money, don't take ribbis, and so we see that ribbis, we see the idea of interest is mentioned. Lo basi liyado, if still teshuva doesn't come to him, at shemocher es atzmo, then he's going to have to sell himself. Shenemar, like the pasuk says, v'chiyamoch achicha v'nimkar loch, lo loch el lager, it doesn't mean to you, he's not just going to be sold to you, he's going to end up being sold to a stranger. Shenemar lager, as the pasuk says, lager, v'lo lager tzedek, and not a ger tzedek, not a full convert, el lager toshav, just what we call a ger toshav, somebody who lives in Eretz Yisrael, keeps the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, but is not a full ger. Shenemar ger toshav, like it says in the pasuk, ger toshav. And then the pasuk says further, mishpachas ger, the family of a ger. What does that mean? Is ovid kochavim. That means he's going to be sold to an idol worshiper. And kishomer le'aker. And then when it says le'aker, that refers to an even lower level. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chaf Amid Beis.